Hello, it's my pleasure today to introduce Senator Ron Wyden. My name is Professor Robert Strongen. I'm on the faculty of the chemistry department at Portland State University, and I study the chemistry of vaping, and I'm well aware of some of the harms and toxicants that are inhaled by vapors and how it's affected young kids. I'm a parent myself. I live in Portland and have a teenage son. And so Ron Wyden is a champion of the anti-vaping cause. And we want to welcome him. He's served us so well for many years, since 1980 in the House or Senate. And he's been committed to open government, bipartisanship, innovation, Oregon values and priorities, and we really appreciate his stance on vaping and our kids.
Thank you all for the chance to say a few words at this important event. I've worked with parents against vaping e-cigarettes for years now. It's part of our fight to protect the health of our kids and hold big tobacco accountable for its role in the youth e-cigarette epidemic. And now you all are a force to be reckoned with. Because of your advocacy and your bravery as you share your own personal stories and your determination, the FDA is finally taking action. The agency is finally cracking down on stores selling illegally flavored vape products that appeal to youth. The FDA is also making it easier for the public to report tobacco product violations like sales to underage purchasers. These are important first steps to protect kids, but the FDA can't stop there. There's more work to be done to protect our nation's young people and steer them off a lifetime of addiction. Your partnership in this effort is essential in this battle. I know that together we can continue to make real progress to protect kids and curb addiction to e-cigarettes. Thanks so much for all the terrific work that you're doing. I look forward to our continued partnership. All the best for a successful event.
Hello, I'm Dr. Harold Koplowitz, founding president and medical director of the Child Mind Institute, the leading independent nonprofit in children's mental health. We're dedicated to transforming the lives of children and families struggling with mental health and learning disorders by giving them the help they need. We provide gold standard evidence-based care, deliver educational resources to millions of families each year, and we train educators in underserved communities and develop tomorrow's breakthrough treatments. With headquarters in Midtown Manhattan and an increasingly nationwide and international presence, we are at the forefront of the fight against the global youth mental health crisis. And I'm honored to be here today to welcome you and to discuss a connected issue: youth vaping. Our kids are in crisis, and vaping companies are making money off struggling children and families. Did you know that over 17 million young people in the United States will have a mental health disorder by age 18? In 2017, 600,000 U.S. youth required medical attention for self-injury, and yet today, over 1.2 million teens in the U.S. visit the emergency room each year for suicidal ideation or attempts. The suicide rate among 10 to 24-year-olds in the U.S. increased by almost 60% between 2007 and 2018. And now 6,600 kids in this age group die by suicide every year. Meanwhile, only about a third of U.S. kids with mental health disorders get treated, and teens experiencing an untreated mental health disorder like anxiety, depression, or ADHD commonly self-medicate. Vaping nicotine can cause circulatory problems and potentially even lung irritation, making the activities kids enjoy harder for a generation already struggling to pull themselves away from screens. Teenagers are at a very susceptible time of brain development, which continues until age 24. It's a great time to learn. Unfortunately, it's also a great time to learn bad habits. And those habits get harder to unlearn as their brains become more rigid as adults. So teenage brains also perceive risk differently. So teenagers are more likely to get addicted, and as they age, it will get harder for them to quit. Additionally, the human brain evolved to know a few people very well. But starting around 2010, we all got these devices that connected us to the whole world and everyone on it 24/7. And teens' developing brains are particularly sensitive to substances and influence alike. And we know that a major downside of the internet is exposure to dangerous content, glorifying things like substance use. These issues are all connected, and they were all worsened by the pandemic, which decreased social interaction and activities and increased internet use. Kids who were already struggling, the 70% not getting treatment, were hit the hardest by COVID, and re-entry with anxious kids having to go back to school and kids with ADHD facing the demands of classroom behavior. Post-COVID, there's still more internet use and loneliness. Kids are dealing with climate anxiety. Kids are also have concerns and fear of school shootings and concern over wars on multiple fronts. And anxious kids are more likely to self-medicate with substances like nicotine. We all want to protect our kids, and we want kids to stop dying avoidable deaths, stop harming themselves knowingly or unknowingly. And we can and we should push companies to change. We can lobby for government protections and more research funding. But with our kids' lives on the line, we can't just wait for these organizations and government to do the right thing. Thankfully, even when children are struggling, parents have the power to change their lives. Prevention is always the most effective strategy, but early intervention before they're addicted or a co-occurring disorder sets in is also highly effective. Identifying and treating an underlying disorder can reduce substance use, and reducing substance use can also lead to better mental health outcomes. The key is to know your kids, know how much they sleep and eat, what they enjoy, so you can spot the changes in those patterns that often occur with both substance use and mental health disorders. Pretend your kids are your clients. Lean in and make an effort to learn. What are they passionate about? Are they dating? What sports teams do they like? And can you learn more about those things? Knowing your kid requires keeping an open line of communication with regular, non-judgmental check-ins and lots of questions. In fact, listen more and talk less. If you're worried about your child, our Family Resource Center on childmind.org has expert-informed guides, articles, and a symptom checker. Our website has a series of preventative video and print resources called Healthy Minds, Thriving Kids that any parent or teacher can use to teach kids mental health fitness skills. Right now, our kids need all the help they can get. I'm so glad you're with us. I hope you enjoy this panel of experts, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dr. Koplowitz, for your introductory remarks, really powerful. And just by way of introduction, because I didn't yet introduce you, I wanted to give a little background on you because you're an incredible partner of ours and just a fantastic expert. Dr. Harold Koplowitz is founding president and medical director at the Child Mind Institute and one of the nation's leading child and adolescent psychiatrists. And just a little bit of background about our relationship with Child Mind. 5 years ago, when PAVe was first getting started, when the founders realized that a Juul representative entered their 9th grade teens classroom in New York, Child Mind Institute was actually the first organization we reached out to, and they informed us that Juul was actually doing the same in California schools. And since then, they've just been incredible partners to us and very instrumental. So thank you again, Dr. Koplowitz, for your remarks. For those of you who haven't been introduced, I'm Mimi Boblik, founding partner and volunteer at Parents Against Vaping, and I'll be moderating this next panel discussion. We have called this Colliding Crisis, the connection between vaping and mental health. And I really feel like Jackie, one of our incredible youth panelists, teed this conversation up so beautifully when she said, and I will paraphrase, if there was more empathy around the conversation and more of a mental health conversation around vaping addiction, it might be more impactful. So really powerful words. So I just want to introduce our panelists quickly. We have Dr. Jonathan Avery, Vice Chair of Addiction Psychiatry at Weill Cornell Medical College. Welcome. Liz Hare, PhD, Senior Vice President at the Truth Initiative Schroeder Institute. Thank you for joining us. And Raphael Orphan, Research Coordinator, University of Rochester Medical Center. And finally, Dr. Sarper Taskiran, Senior Child and Adolescent Psychiatrist at the Child Mind Institute. So welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for your time and expertise. So we've heard so much in the past few years about how our young people are having more mental health struggles than ever, and how they could be leading to a rise in substance use. That's this term colliding crisis that we'll get to. And, you know, we parents have also witnessed it directly with our own kids, anxiety, depression, feeling overwhelmed, and public health and school professionals are also telling us that they're seeing it too. And as Dr. Koplowitz mentioned, you know, COVID seems to have really exacerbated and accelerated this situation. So I want to start with Dr. Avery and Dr. Taskiran talking about your work directly with youth in your practices and also from the research that you're seeing. What have you noticed in the past several years with regard to youth mental health struggles and substance use in general and vaping specifically? Have you witnessed an uptick, or what have you seen?
Yes, I can start. It's great to be here, and thanks for all the work you all are doing. I think Dr. Koplowitz gave a great overview of where we're at, and you know, even before COVID, we were seeing the youth struggling. I mean, the data on persistent sadness and hopelessness and self-harm, they were up even before COVID. And then you had COVID and stress related to race and the wars and the screens and everything else. It's not surprising that we saw, and we do see in our clinical practice, more and more adolescents using substances. I think one thing that I'll add to that great introduction is that this stress is on our kids, but it's also really on our parents. And, you know, there was a real notable study that came out about 2 months ago about how adults between age 35 to 50 drinking more, binging more, using more marijuana, more hallucinogens than ever before. And so this stress is, of course, stressing our kids, but partly because it's stressing their parents. You know, 35 to 50, these are the age of the parents of the adolescents. And so they're using more substances. They're stressed by all the same stressors that are impacting the kids. And so where do kids turn? You can't turn to mom and dad sometimes. We saw in COVID an increase of violence at home, increased violence in communities. You know, you don't feel safe at school. You end up at home on your screen and turning to something that can provide some relief. And, you know, we're certainly highlighting nicotine in this space, but, you know, also marijuana and other substances. And, you know, when you feel like there aren't outlets, when you feel trapped, when you feel sad and alone and anxious, it's not surprising that you use these devices to get relief. And then the terrible thing that happens is that they 100% help at first. That's why everyone does drugs. They help at first. You know, weeks and months in, they're making everything worse. And now you have an additional problem to untangle. You're stuck in an addiction that often pushes you more into the secrets and isolates you more and more from your community and from help.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to you, Sarper, to add to that.
Oh, you're muted. Sorry. Thanks.
COVID area throwback, you're on mute. We all had that in the classrooms. Thank you for the opening remarks. And I think that I second what John was saying about the family stress with the family, and the kids are trying to cope in the best way they can. What I have been seeing in my practice, and I'm seeing a lot of youth between ages of 12, a lot of teens, and population that I call emerging adults. They're not quite yet into adulthood, but they're going there. They are dealing with a lot of isolation. They're isolated from their communities. They lost a lot during COVID, and they can't get back on track. They're still trying to figure out their social relationships, peer relationships. Everything came back on board all of a sudden, and psychologically and emotionally, they're not there. Their school lives were disrupted, so they're trying to find their way back in the social circles that they used to be. The world is more unpredictable than ever before. There's always a talk of war and unrest somewhere. There's a lot of big discussions happening in the larger community. They are feeling uncertain about their futures. They have endured a lot of learning loss during COVID, so they're trying to catch up. And while they're catching up, the system is not really letting them to ease in because they have these responsibilities and the tests, the assessments that they need to take. And on top of it, because of their time during COVID that they lost at home, they have a lot of executive skills deficits where they can't really organize themselves enough. They can't really attend as long. So these are all the damages that were caused by the pandemic. And during the pandemic, and right before, that's when electronic cigarettes and vaping went bigger in the market. They were available, and during that, it created as a way for them to deal with it. Now, I'm not saying that all the increase in vapes and usage of electronic cigarettes were caused by mental health problems. There are some other factors involved as well, but I think that the anxiety, the increase in low mood states, dysthymia, depression, and the difficulties with attention and executive functioning skills paved the way to increase in electronic cigarette use. And like John was saying, initially, these substances have an effect. And they do have this perceived sense to calm them down or to give them to do something or to improve their attention. Again, I'm saying perceived sense. Some people say that it really works for them, but then they quickly find themselves in an addicted pattern that they can't get themselves out of. And maybe we will get to that later on, but something that is interesting about vaping and electronic cigarettes was the perception of the youth, that what kind of perceptions they had. A wake-up call, I'm going to give you an anecdote from my practice, for me was because in the beginning, it wasn't really everywhere. And I was hearing it here and there from some of my patients. And I talk to depressed and anxious and teens who are struggling with attention all the time. So it's here and there. But then it was nothing. It was not a thing. And then it was the thing. It was everywhere all of a sudden. And I think that the information and the dangers of it came lagging. And that created a big fuel into getting these substances more and more used. I was talking with a 17-year-old in my office who was prepping for ACTs, and he asked me to write him an accommodation letter to the College Board, allowing him to use his vaping device at school during the test, claiming that it helped him with his focus and attention. It really decreased his anxiety, and it was a fidgeting device for him. But that told me two things. One is he had no perception of how dangerous this was, and how he thought about the acceptance of these devices are in public. For him to be able to ask his doctor for an accommodation to write to the College Board, this is not the same thing as smoking cigarettes, because he's a very intelligent individual who would know that this would be an off request. So there was something about that perception. And I think that there has been a lot of work done since then, thanks to organizations like yours. But I think it's interesting to talk about that perception along the way as well.
Yeah, and just to build on that before we get to the other panelists, because we were talking last week about this and about this colliding crisis, and you did say that we don't want to just blame it on, if you will, the mental health issues, that there are other perceptions of risk and social factors that come into play. And in fact, not surprisingly, we just learned of a study that suggests that family and friends are very important when analyzing adolescent risk for these devices, and shouldn't surprise us. But wonder if you can just elaborate a bit on the sort of non-mental health issues that really come into play for our youth, some of the social pressures and other.
Sure. It's social pressures, and it's you're referring to, I believe, that the JAMA study that was working on the key factors associated with electronic nicotine delivery systems. And what that study beautifully depicts is it is the health concerns, but also it is one of the key factors that increase use is best friends suggestion, or even if they don't suggest, best friends using electronic cigarettes and vapes, household attitudes about substances in general, household tobacco use, curiosity of teens, and this unmet curiosity, meaning that this is not a conversation in the home. They have a lot of questions, but it's not something that they broach at home. So those are all factors. And I think that this is, in a way, they're whatever they find as interesting and novel and exciting in their community at large. And when I say community, it's their immediate friends circle. It's the larger school community. And now we're talking about a huge online, millions of people community that they belong to. And as these devices became more normalized and marketed and advertised, it was out there for them to hold on to as adolescents do, as a thing to get them to be more independent, to give them something to be excited about, and give them to be to do something that did not belong to their parents' generation, but to their generation. So a lot of the teens that I talk to, they tell me that Juul is a Gen Z thing. And I'm thinking like it shouldn't have been that way, because Gen Z wasn't smoking in the first place, right? So it wasn't, but they perceived, because of the marketing, that it was actually belonged to their generation and their group. So, and that was something that they were doing because their parents weren't doing that. So it was something of their own. They claimed it. And therein started the problem. And now we're in a deep crisis of a generation of youth who are addicted to nicotine and who are struggling with all the impairments in memory, attention, learning, and mood that come from nicotine addiction.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I know, Dr. Avery, we're going to lose you a little early today. Is there anything you want to add to that conversation before we move on, in terms of sort of that normalizing behavior? And also, I remember Dr. Taskiran also was talking about sort of it's a sign that I've grown up. Like I've grown up. Like I'm vaping, and that's a sign to his society or her society. I don't know if that makes, if you want to elaborate on that, but before we.
As I hear it, though, I agree. I mean, those are great points, and the problem is that we struggle to just have ongoing, nuanced, non-stigmatized conversations about addiction and even mental health issues. And my research has shown that our attitudes are worse towards kids and people that use substance use than towards any other population. And part of one consequence of that stigma is that, it feels a little too hot to address in nuanced ways, and to, have those early conversations with kids about our attitudes and what it meant for our generation and their generation. And a lot of it is we do push kids to do these novel things just because we haven't been talking about it, even if we might be able to take some ownership of it as the adults in the room, and help them understand why they might use and what you've done in the past and why we're drinking and doing everything, to cope. And so I think one antidote to all of this is to have events like this, but also to have, increased opportunities to have conversations as families, as communities, about all these devices and our struggles in a way that's, non-stigmatized and open. I can end there.
Your expression always not haunts me, but really resonates, which is addiction hides in the shadows. And I think that's a really powerful way to think about it. Thank you, Dr. Avery. So I want to turn to Raphael for a moment, because you work with a more targeted population. Can you first tell us about the population that you serve and the research you're doing in the field? And then please tell us, if you would, some of the issues you're hearing in the field. Are they similar to what Dr. Avery and Dr. Taskiran are describing more broadly, or are they somehow unique?
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely speak to that. So I think one important thing to note is how we're servicing the population that we are. So we're utilizing community-based participatory research procedures. So it's pretty much involving the community in every step of the research process. If you don't understand the needs and wants of the community, and if they're not involved in every step, how are you going to provide equitable, effective services for them. But to speak to what I've been doing for the past couple of years, I've been mainly working with the Latino population. But I have focused on the youth and young adult population, anywhere from around 12 to 25. So I think there is a lot of crossover when it comes to what Dr. Avery and Dr. Tiskurian said. I don't think mental health is not, specific to one population, but the way that we approach it and have the conversations, that's what has to be different within each population. So a couple of things that we've been working on has really been creating services that are both culturally and linguistically appropriate for the population that we're serving. So, putting together community advisory boards of young adults to be able to create the text messages that we send out in our intervention, so it's relevant to them. I think this generation Z, I'm a part of it. I grew up in the explosion of e-cigarettes. I was a freshman in high school whenever they first started coming around the block and blowing up. So I get it. And I think I like what Dr. Avery and Dr. Tiskurian says, is that we have to approach it in a novel way. Generation Z, our attention span is 8 seconds. We're the TikTok culture. So we have to be novel. We have to create new ways and sort of approach e-cigarettes in a different way than we approach cigarettes and other substance abuse in the past. So, yeah.
And what have you found helpful on the ground to mitigate the challenges that you're facing there through your research? And
it's a tricky question, honestly. The most effective thing to reach, or the most effective avenue to reach the youth and young adult population, I don't think it's going to come as a surprise to anyone, is through social media. So when it comes to recruitment, when it comes to dissemination and implementation, and pretty kind of almost every single step, even recruitment for the advisory boards, social media has been effective. I think about around 95 to 98% of youth and young adults have a smartphone. So I think really meeting them where they're at is the most important thing. It has to be convenient. It has to be in their face for it to actually string a chord whenever or within them. So.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Perfect segue into my questions for Beth. So Beth, Truth Initiative authored a white paper, which I think we may be putting in the chat, on the colliding crisis, which was actually sort of the genesis for the phrase. And so can you speak briefly about how Truth came up with this and how it's been integrated into the campaign messages? It sounds like the campaign research has shown that it has actually lowered use among young people, which is terrific. And I actually think that the message of depression sticks, the campaign depression sticks, was actually really, really powerful, because it really does drive home the message that it can worsen feelings of anxiety and depression. So if you could just talk a little bit about what you all are working on and how it's been helpful to youth.
Yeah, I think one of the hallmarks of the Truth campaign and the work that we do here is we actually do try to find the intersection between an area that's important to youth and vaping, because vaping or tobacco use is not a topic that youth and young adults want to talk about. So we've got to find that intersection over an area in which they are interested in. And so when this report we authored back in we put it out in the fall of 2021, because we were really seeing that intersection between the important topics in which kids were saying rose to the top for them, and mental health was key. So mental health, suicide prevention, physical health was there too, but we had over 80% saying my mental health is one of the most important topics. And I think we've heard that from our other panelists here, right? That this is really an important aspect for youth and young adults. And so we then happen to know that the crisis, we also have a crisis going around in vaping. So we had these two colliding crises that were happening simultaneously. And we're like, how can we message? Because one, they want to deal with the mental health, and one way to deal with mental health is by not consuming nicotine in any form. And so that was the genesis of our original kind of depression stick campaign, is that how can we get that message out to youth and young adults in a key way. Again, the Surgeon General has risen it to the top for both of these topics, right? That these are real issues that need to be addressed for our youth and young adults. But we also heard mental health has not just happened in the last couple of years, right? This has been something that the CDC has talked about for many years, but that persistent sadness and hopelessness. And we do see kids saying, a large majority of these young people in research that we've done report that they've started using e-cigarettes or in vaping so that they are lessening those feelings of stress, anxiety, and depression. And many continue vaping because they say that it is a relief. I loved the story. I don't know if love is the right word, but there's just such an anecdote about, hey, can you give me an accommodation to use a vape device during my tests so that I can concentrate on that test? We were hearing those types of feedback and like across our multiple surveys and interactions with youth and young adult. And so we've got to kind of correct that perception that once you get into that addiction cycle, what you're actually doing is decreasing your mental health and your well-being. And how can we break that cycle? So if you haven't seen, we have a brand new campaign out. It's a very humorous campaign featuring a toxic therapist who's giving really bad advice in a very sarcastic tone. He is voiced by the Saturday Night Live cast member Chris Parnell. And again, he impersonates this therapist who's offering these unhealthy and detrimental advice. And that has just been released. It's at the beginning of October, and it's getting really great engagement with our youth and young adults. It's kind of that sarcastic humor as a way to break through to them on a topic area. But what I'm really happy to report, and this comes directly from my team, is that our mental health and vaping messages that we have had out since the fall of 2021 really have changed vaping use among youth. So we have found in those weeks in which we have higher awareness of our campaign, youth are reporting are less likely to report using vaping devices. And so we're really happy. We're hoping that that's really going to start changing the overall trajectory of use for youth and young adults.
Thank you. It's really promising, and hopefully more kids will see these campaigns and campaigns like it and be inspired not to start and maybe to quit, right? So I want to turn a little bit to strategies for parents and caregivers. We feel so helpless sometimes, where feelings of stress and anxiety, other mental health challenges are driving vaping use, and less the social, which we could get to. What can we do as parents and other adults who touch the lives of our children? What can we do to mitigate these feelings in our kids? Maybe I'll start with you, Jonathan, because I know, Dr. Avery, because I know you will be leaving us at 2.
Just scream at them as much as we. No, I think the tendency is to panic and to punish and to finger wag, and that's true. Now that I have kids entering adolescence myself, I'm learning how hard it is to not do those things and to panic and to check our own pulse. But as parents, I think the first thing is to put the oxygen mask on ourselves and be aware of what we're modeling to kids in terms of how we're coping with the stresses of the time and how we're talking about it, and including talking about our own struggles with addiction and mental health and what sort of treatments we're getting. And then hopefully, I think as Dr. Coplitz said at the beginning, we're thinking about these conversations in terms of prevention is sort of the most important thing, that we're having early ongoing conversations about this, so that our first intervention on this topic isn't when we're already in a crisis mode. But we've laid the foundation of a family unit, of a school unit, of a community that understands how to talk about it and address it when it happens. And it will happen for a lot of us, even despite our best efforts. So we need some language and shared understanding of how we think about it and how we address it. And so I think that early, often talking about it, getting everyone on board, from the school to the pediatricians to the mental health providers, is key. And then letting people know that they're not alone and that good treatments exist, I think, is also key. I think people sometimes can't imagine a way out when in fact there's a menu of options, from nicotine replacement to therapy to addressing the mental health issues. And so I think all that can be, if that's communicated early and often, can make it seem like a less daunting situation if something does happen.
You touched on something Dr. Taskiran actually was talking about again last week in our conversation about how stressed out parents are these days. And so maybe you want to, if you don't mind touching on that conversation a little bit and how they can take care of themselves so that they can help their own kids, because I do agree there is a link there.
Yeah, and as I was saying a little earlier, in terms of the record numbers of substances adults are using, and we're in our own mental health crisis, and we're reading the news, and you know, it's a tough landscape for all of us. And you know, even if you're reluctant to get help yourself or to think about help, you can do it just as modeling for kids, like how you talk about it and think about it, because kids pay attention to how we handle things. And you know, I can't tell my daughter to stop using the phone I just got her if I'm constantly on the phone every second I'm home, which is maybe what I'm doing. So it's hard. But if we're not sort of checking that behavior in ourselves and modeling it from the top all the way to the down, we can't expect the kids to do something we can't do. And so I do think interventions that address the whole family, all of society, are needed to help our kids the most.
Does anyone have anything else to add to that, Dr. Tiskiran? I know we were discussing it last week, but or anything else about how we can help parents and caregivers really help our kids?
Well, I'm going to just put out there that Truth does have a text-based This Is Quitting app that is for any young person who wants to actually quit. It's free. It's anonymous text messaging program. And again, it was designed specifically to help people quit vaping by helping them feel motivated, inspired, supported. It tries to support the mental health side of it as well. They just have to text Ditch Vape to 88709. There is a complimentary piece for parents. So parents can join their own support network at our becomeanx.org website, where there's a community of adults that are there that really try to help give parents strategies and support on how to help their youth and young adults through this quit process. And again, in the best way possible, with coaches and everything to say, these are the types of things that you can do and say and be supportive to help them through the process.
Thank you. Anyone else on that question before we, yes, Dr.
Yeah, I was going to say that, first of all, those support systems are extremely valuable because, you know, when I talk to parents, they don't know what to do, and teens are looking for text-based or app-based solutions or, you know, helpful support systems. So, you know, what you have is extremely helpful at Truth. I wanted to add to what Dr. Avery was saying, that, you know, parents need to manage their own stress in order to be available for their teens, because oftentimes I hear the response of it's almost like a, you know, conditioned response that, you know, this is not a vaping household. I can't believe you did this. I can't believe that you vaped. You're grounded for a month, and, you know, you have no electronics for a month, and that's the end of the conversation. While we support that, they need to understand that this shouldn't be acceptable at home. I don't think that the hazard reduction strategy or of like allowing vaping because it is, you know, supposedly less harmful than other things, that's not a good approach. But there needs to be a way in between, because the parents need to be in communication and they need to be in conversation with their teens in order to get the message across. And when they they shouldn't let vaping to draw a wedge between their themselves and their teens, because the conversation needs to be active. It doesn't have to be a one and only conversation. It can start more generalized. It can be more, you know, inquiring about what they're doing and what their friends are doing, what are the, you know, general vibe in their community towards vaping, and understanding where the teen is coming from, and to give the message that they're in this together. And if they feel like their parents are with them, it is an easier battle to take, because then you have actually your parents as the support system when they're trying to quit. For the teens that I walked alongside when they're trying to quit, there are going to be times that they are going to withdraw, and they will feel irritable. They will feel like they need to do something. They sometimes need to get outside and go for a walk in the middle of the night. They sometimes need to chew like toothpicks, or sometimes binge on candy and stuff like that in order to get through that initial phase of withdrawal. So that's why if their parents are in on it, walking alongside, it's so much easier, so that it's not something that they can take it on themselves. And parents, this is a way of resilience building. We always talk about resilience, but seeing that their teens are making a mistake and helping them to get back up after they fall down is an incredible message for their future in terms of their resilience. And reframing this challenge as a short-term problem that they can overcome, and in the future this is an opportunity for learning, and this is giving them the opportunity to make their own decisions. Encourage them, motivate them, be there for them when they're trying to quit, and helping them alongside. I think that's the best thing they can do. And talking about, it's not only for them, but I think parents need to talk about their kids' best friends and their community as well. So that's why I encourage the parents to be more active in their schools, be more active in their community, because they can't really help their kid in the vacuum. They need to make sure that their best friend, Jack or Sarah or whoever that is not vaping as well, in order to keep their kids vape free.
Yeah, I mean, you touched, please go ahead, Raphael.
I just wanted to throw one more tidbit in there, but I don't want to sideswipe the conversation. So if you have something else to touch on. I've had several conversations with tons of youth and young adults, and one common theme that they've brought up is, my parents don't know what they're talking about. They call it a vapor creator, or like they come from an uneducated standpoint. So, I mean, kids are smart nowadays. We have access to information like we've never had before. So I think one thing that I'd pitch out to all parents is to do a little homework, educate yourself a little bit, and come from an educated standpoint instead of not really understanding what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they're doing it, and how it's affecting them. And then the only other thing I'll say is to take away the stigma. Parents are crucial in the process to help their kids out. And what Dr. Taskiran said, I love, to help them alongside, encourage them, but also, encourage them to talk to their friends, to talk to their counselors, to talk to their therapists if they have somebody, or to talk to their doctor on their regular visits. Take away the stigma, because right now kids feel that they get apprehended, like Dr. Taskiran was saying. It's probably the worst approach that you can take as a parent, is to make them feel like they're in the wrong. I think it's better to counsel and educate and lead them down the right path than to demand and obligate that they stop and whatnot.
Yeah, it's a great point. And we do hear from a lot of schools that they're turning to more punitive approaches because they're just feeling helpless and they don't have the budgets and so forth. But we know that these more restorative approaches work better, both in schools and at home, right? It's statistically, proven out in our research that when you use punitive approaches, it's actually can be detrimental to the youth. So thank you for sharing that as well. And I want to just build on a little something that Dr. Taskiran started, which is this discussion about resiliency, because as a parent, I keep hearing about how, we need to build resiliency in our youth to cope with stresses and failures and challenges in their lives and social pressures, et cetera, so that they don't feel the need to experiment and don't turn to substances like vaping to cope. And I'm just wondering if, as a parent, how do you build that resiliency? And I'm sure it starts very young. We've heard the term snowflakes. We don't want to create snowflakes out of our kids who cannot handle the stresses, because that's probably why they turn to drugs and other substances like vaping. So wonder if you could talk a little bit about how we as parents can encourage our kids to become more resilient. And maybe I'll start with you, Dr. Taskiran, since you probably have seen it.
I can say a few things about it. As parents, we really want to protect them, and we really want them to have a good experience in life. And we all think that a good experience is an experience where they don't feel any sadness, they don't feel worried, they don't feel bad, and they're just happy all the time, which is a very unrealistic view of life, and it doesn't align with the reality of life. So when we coddle kids so much, then we end up with snowflakes. So early on, and with anxiety treatment here at CMI, what we do is we, label the anxiety, we make it into something that worthy adversary that the child is dealing with. And then we give the child opportunities to expose himself or herself to that, to the anxiety trigger in order to master the sense of ability to tackle it in a way to desensitize and get it to a place where they can deal with that anxiety trigger. So that's the same thing with life. I think kids are better off when they're let by their parents to be involved, to be exposed to anxiety-provoking situations in order to build that resilience, or experience sadness, experience grief, experience risk in controlled conditions, and sometimes mistakes, so that they can learn from that mistakes. I think we are, this is my personal observation, but I see sometimes parents overdo the protection and overdo risk aversion, so that the children are not exposed to things, so they don't have a good confidence when it comes to judging what is something that they can comfortably overcome, and they avoid anxiety triggering situations. So and also another part of it is, teaching them to move towards a goal, teaching them to have plans, and to, make them go pursue those plans and actually make them, not to support them too much to the point that we are doing their goals, or we're making their goals for them, so that they can sense that early on mastery and they can feel proud of themselves.
Thank you very much. Anyone else want to add to that? That's really helpful information. All right, well,
really well said. I think just to piggyback off of what Dr. Jaskiran was saying, just tell them it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be angry. These feelings aren't unique to them, and they're not alone. So just making sure that they know that it's not a bad thing, and they shouldn't be, well, that is a secret. I mean, they're exposed to the perfect life, complete happiness on social media and other avenues every single day. So tell them that that's not normal. That's not what you should be trying to strive for. And, just being okay with being where they are and who they are and how they're feeling.
I think that's really important. And I think you've all touched on the impact of social media on our kids. I think it's very hard for parents to limit it without just grabbing the phone away. We don't have these, parental controls are very hard. Kids know workarounds, so it's really hard to do. I think it's just more important that we talk to our kids and help them with strategies, but or just take that phone away sometimes. Well, I want to thank all of our panelists. Sorry that Dr. Ager had to leave early, but I do want to say thank you to everyone for being here, and really appreciate your insights. And we will be answering questions after this. I know some people are asking questions in the Q&A. We have fantastic questions, and we'll get to those, if not today, following the conversation today. So thank you again, all. Take care.
Hi, everyone. That was such a great session. Thank you so much. Hi, Meredith.
Hi, Dorian. Yeah, I think that it was great to hear from Dr. Koplowitz, and it was great to hear from that group, because we do know that these are, as Truth coined it, and we always want to give them credit, these are colliding crises, that the youth mental health emergency and the youth vaping crisis are happening at the same time. And it's a perfect storm when you couple them with lack of enforcement and lack of regulation. And that's why we are where we are.